me today Ginny Dent Brant.
Our problems today are more spiritual than they are political.
Convictions must be strong. Pierce the darkness with the light as you go along. Living with one foot in heaven, breaking the enemy's power. In the strength of Jesus we can stand in the darkest hour. Living with one foot in heaven, ready when he calls our name. For believers to live is Christ, to die is only gain.
Welcome to Heritage of Truth. I'm Patty. I have with me today Ginny Dent Brant, and we have her book here today, Finding True Freedom, and the byline says, From the White House to the World. So, from the White House to the world, tell me about your life.
Well, Patty, I grew up in Washington, D.C. in the halls of power. And my dad served a senator and 3 presidents. And we were the family that everyone looked to and said they have it all. They get to go to the concerts at the Kennedy Center from the president's box and White House dinners.
Wow.
I flew on Air Force One.
My
Got to
goodness.
roll Easter eggs with the Easter Bunny on the White House lawn, those kind of things. From the outside looking in, we had it all. But we were missing something, absolutely missing something. And that is our life was not centered on Christ. We were on our way to heaven with our good works. And God began removing things one by one. And the first thing of growing up in Washington was my dad was rarely home. My mother had grown up in an alcoholic home. Her mother an alcoholic. Her father had abandoned them. And so she had a difficult childhood. And when my dad was in Washington and never home, she felt abandoned by him. So at age 16, my whole world fell apart. We were, like I say, the family that everybody looked to, and then all of a sudden, my mother was in a severe depression. And then the Watergate trials came on top of that, because my dad was one of the president's men when Watergate went down.
Oh, wow.
So those were very, very difficult years. But you know what? God works through the tough times in our lives to develop character and to make us what he wants us to be.
And how old were you when all of this?
I was 16 when my mother fell into a depression. I was 16 when the Watergate happened. But this is the interesting thing. 6 months before all this happened, God was knocking on the door of my heart, bringing people into my life through Young Life to mentor me and to share the gospel with me. And I had given my life to Jesus. But isn't it amazing that God knew what was going to happen to my family? And here he is preparing me, the child in the family, to help the family through a crisis. Had he not done that, I don't know what would have happened.
Wow, that is awesome.
So it's a story of the grace of God.
Story of the sovereignty of God.
Yes.
And how we can trust him, no matter
That's
what.
right.
Wow.
Because I began praying for my dad at age 16 and prayed for him for many years. And the book is really the story of what God did in my dad's life and the life of a family as I was a teenager praying.
Wow, the power of prayer.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, what exactly inspired you to write this book?
Well, after all I went through with the Watergate trials, Daddy almost going to prison, which the book tells you what happened, and my mother's depression and all the things that we went through, my father, you would think he would have become a Christian, but he didn't by that point. He was still actually persecuting his own daughter, making fun of me because I wanted to go to seminary, making fun of me because I wanted to go into missions, into Christian work, and forbidding me to do that. And I went anyway, having to pay my own way through college, where he prayed for my brother. He paid for my brother to go to Harvard, my sister to go to Furman University. But no, if I was going to go there, I had to pay my own way. And what happened was, God ended up working in his life, and he became everything he forbid me to be, including that missionary he didn't want me to be. So I'm in Romania in 1998 on a mission trip with my dad. He had already planted 50 churches by that time and helped the government come to freedom after the devastating effects of communism. And I'm seeing all God's done in his life, and I am overwhelmed at the goodness and sovereignty of God. And every night I put my head on my pillow and I would cry tears of joy. Look what you did, God, in answer to my prayers. That's when I knew I'd write the book. It was too good of a story not to tell.
When I think of how many 16-year-olds are going through tough family times, who are feeling abandoned.
Oh, yes.
Alcoholic
Definitely.
parents.
Definitely.
And then to hear your story, that because of you, because of your prayers, because of your, I would imagine, dependence on the Lord and just
I
depending
had nowhere to
on
look
Him.
but up, Patty. Nowhere to look but up.
What advice could you give to other teenagers who find themselves in that situation now?
Well, I'll give the same advice that was given to me when I went to a Bible college professor and said, what do I do about my father who's persecuting me? What do I do about my family? And he said, pray with a passion. Live your life as a witness and pray that God would bring someone their age, their level into their life. Don't you try to manipulate and force. It never works. And I prayed for years and years and years, and there were many days I was absolutely discouraged, thinking, nothing's going to happen. God, are you answering my prayers? But you know what? The whole time God was working in my father's life. And when he got his life spiritually right with God, the whole family began to come around, because he became the spiritual leader of his family at a later age in life. So my advice would be pray with a passion for that family member or that loved one that you want to see in heaven, and live your life. Realize they must see something different in you, or why should they be interested? And even though you may feel persecuted, you may feel discouraged, God is working. Don't give up.
That is so true. I think even those of us who are a little older than 16 could take that to heart too.
Everyone has a loved one they want
Yes.
to see in heaven.
Yes.
No doubt about
My
it.
father was prayed for many, many years. He was 66 before he came to know the Lord.
That would have worn out my patience if I had to wait that long. 48 was long enough.
But, now his grandchildren see him reading the Bible.
Right.
And we
It
hear
makes
him
a
pray.
huge difference.
And it's very significant. There's been a significant change in the atmosphere of our family, since that has happened. So I'm really glad to hear that. You said your father advised presidents.
Yes.
I wonder what advice he might give to a president today.
My dad's advice to presidents was always political. But today, if my father was giving advice, I know he would give the spiritual advice first, because he was transformed from a political strategist to a kingdom strategist, a man who knew the best of politics in man's ways to seeing things from God's perspective. I think he would say, look, this is not a time to remove the 10 Commandments, to remove everything about God from the public arena. This is a time to turn to God, ask his forgiveness, and beg for his help. Our country has more problems from within and from without than we have ever seen before. And this is not a time to squash God and say, we don't need you. We very much need him today. And I believe that's what he'd say. He'd give some political advice. Don't spend what you don't have. Hold to the Constitution, the freedoms of this country. Keep the federal government limited. But my dad would be the first to say that our problems today are more spiritual than they are political.
Yes, yes. You mentioned that you traveled with your father. You said something about him being a missionary. How did all of that happen?
He ended up going to Romania after the communist walls came down with Episcopal evangelist John Guest. And when he went, the government said, oh, you're the man that advised presidents. We need your help. And so the government said, we need your help coming to freedom. So he helped the government come to freedom, and he helped the underground church to plant on the surface, because they didn't have freedom overnight. Once communism was over, freedom for them didn't just come over. They didn't know how to come to freedom. So my dad spent 10 years helping that country. That was the love of his life, Romania.
I think about the political scene around the country, around the world today, when countries try to overthrow their governments or things like that happen, and they want to be a free country. So that you're saying that's a process.
It is a process. It doesn't just come overnight. The Romanians elected some of their former communist leaders, and communism kind of continued in a way. So it took a while for them to get on their feet, and they had no middle class. Communism completely ruined the middle class. Everyone was in poverty, except for the communist leaders. So it was they were in a very difficult situation when my father went there. And he was so burdened, he got down on one knee, Patty, and he said, I am so sorry for what has happened to your country, but I promise I will help you.
Oh my goodness.
He did.
So it sounds like your father had a real change in so many ways. How do you think that I see how you change, with in the world, but what difference did that make in your family?
Well, our family, my dad learned that his family was his first mission field. Here he was fighting for the freedoms of this country and almost abandoning his own family. He was spending more time keeping the president's house in order than he was his own house. And when he became a Christian and learned the Bible, he went, oh my goodness. Chuck Colson told him, get your year of biblical training. He's the cover endorser on my book. And when my dad studied the Bible, he said, oh my goodness, I missed God's plan for the family. I thought I was doing the right thing by paving the way for freedom in this country for my family and all the things I provided for them, and realized we needed him more than all those things. Those things were important. But when he got his life straight with his family, then God used him in ministry and still used him to advise politicians.
I've heard so many people say it's not the quantity of time that you spend with your family, it's the quality of time. But if there is no
That's right.
quantity, if there's no time.
And my dad clearly said that
quality.
it's got to be both. And he
Yes.
said, I missed the quantity of time. And he apologized to his children for that.
I think your story is going to be very, very inspirational and very encouraging to everyone who's able to pick up and read the book. Ginny, I just really appreciate you being
Thank you,
here today.
Patty.
Thank you so much.
Thank
And
you.
did we cover your website or where we?
My website is www.GinnyBrant.com. And it has all the information about the book, speaking engagements, where the book is sold.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
For believers to live